Horatius Bonar's article, The Men God Uses in Revival. The world is still sleeping its sleep of death. It has been a slumber of many generations, sometimes deeper, sometimes lighter, yet still a slumber like that of the tomb, as if destined to continue until the last trumpet sound, and then there shall be no more sleep. Yet God has not left the world to sleep on unwarned. He has spoken in a voice that might reach the dullest ears and quicken the coldest heart. 10,000 times has He thus spoken, and still He speaks. But the world refuses to hear. Its myriads slumber on, as if this sleep of death were the very blessedness of its being. Yet, in one sense, the world's sleep has never been universal. Never has there been an age when it could be said that there is not one awake. The multitude has always slept, but there has been always a little flock awake. Even in the world's deepest midnight, there have been always children of the light and of the day. In the midst of a slumbering world, some have been in every age awake. God's voice had reached them. His mighty power had raised them, and they walked the earth, awake among sleepers, the living among the dead. Then, when the voice of God awakes not one, but thousands, it may be in a day, when whole villages and districts seem as if arising and putting on new life, how intensely, how unutterably interesting. At such a crisis it seems as if the world itself were actually beginning to awake, as if the shock that had broken the slumbers of so many were about to shake the whole world together. Yet alas, the tokens of life soon vanish. The half-awakened sleepers sink back into deeper slumber, and the startled world lies down in still more sad and desperate security. The history of the church is full of these awakenings, some on a larger and some on a smaller scale. Indeed, such narratives form the true history of the church, if we are to take our ideas of this from the inspired church history given to us in the Acts of the Apostles. Let us look for a little while at the instruments in their success. Let us note their character and contemplate their success. They were men of like passions as we are, yet how marvelously blessed in their labors. Whence then came their vast success? What manner of men were they? What weapons did they employ? They were in earnest about the great work of the ministry on which they had entered. They felt their infinite responsibility as stewards of the mysteries of God, and shepherds appointed by the chief shepherd to gather in and watch over souls. They lived, labored, and preached like men on whose lips the immortality of thousands hung. Everything they did and spoke bore the stamp of earnestness, and proclaimed to all with whom they came into contact that the matters about which they had been sent to speak were of infinite moment or importance, admitting of no indifference, no postponement even for a day. Yet their fervor was not that of excitement. It was the steadfast but tranquil purpose of men who felt the urgency and weight of the cause entrusted to them, and who knew that necessity was laid upon them. They were bent upon success. It was with a good hope of success that they first undertook the awful office of the ministry. And awful there just means something that inspires awe or weight. The awful ministry, office of the ministry. And to despair of this would have been shameful distrust of Him who had sent them forth, while to be indifferent to it would have been to prove themselves nothing short of traitors to Him and to His cause. As warriors, they set their hearts on victory and fought with a believing anticipation of triumph under the guidance of such a captain as their head. As shepherds, they could not sit idle on the mountainside in the sunshine, the breeze, or the tempest, heedless of their straying, perishing, bleeding flock. They watched, gathered, guarded, and fed the sheep committed to their care. They were men of faith. They plowed and sowed in hope. They might sometimes go forth weeping, bearing precious seed. Yet these were the tears of sorrow and compassion, not of despair. They knew that in due season they would reap if they fainted not, that their labor in the Lord would not be in vain, that ere long they would return bringing their sheaves with them. Thus they went forth in faith and confidence, anticipating victory, defying enemies, despising obstacles, and counting not their lives dear unto them, that they might finish their course with joy in the ministry they had received of the Lord Jesus. It says to compare Acts 20, verse 24. Paul says here, "But none of these things move me." That is all the afflictions that are awaiting Paul in every city. He said, "But none of these things move me, neither count I my life dear unto myself, so that I might finish my course with joy in the ministry which I have received of the Lord Jesus, to testify the gospel of the grace of God." They were men of labor. They were required to bear the burden and heat of the day. It might be truly said of them that, quote, "they scorned delights and lived laborious days." Their lives are the annals of incessant, unwearied toil of body and soul. Time, strength, substance, health, all they were and possessed, they freely offered to the Lord, keeping back nothing, grudging nothing, joyfully, thankfully, surrendering all to Him who loved them and washed them from their sins in His own blood, regretting only this: they had so very little to give up for Him who for their sakes had freely given Himself. They were men of patience. They were not discouraged, though they had to labor long without seeing all the fruit they desired. They continued to sow. Day after day they pursued what, to the eye of the world, appeared a thankless and fruitless round of toil. They were not soon weary in well-doing, remembering the example of the husbandman regarding his perishable harvest. "Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain." James 5:7. Many a good plan has been rendered abortive by impatience. Attempts have been made to force on a revival by men who were impatient at the slow progress of the work in their hand. And seldom have these ended in anything but calamitous failure, or at best a momentary excitement, which scorched and sterilized the soil from which a little more patient toil would have reaped an abundant harvest. They were men of boldness and determination. Adversaries might contend and oppose. Timid friends might hesitate. But they pressed forward, in nothing terrified by difficulty or opposition. Timidity shuts many a door of usefulness and loses many a precious opportunity. It wins no friends, while it strengthens every enemy. Nothing is lost by boldness nor gained by fear. It seems often as if there were a premium upon mere boldness and vigor, apart from other things. Even natural courage and resolution will accomplish much. How much more courage created and upheld by faith and prayer? There is in our own day a still greater need of moral boldness, in order to neutralize the fear of man, the dread of public opinion. That God of our idolatry in this last age, which boasts of superior enlightenment, and which would bring everything to the test of reason or decide it by the votes of the majority. We need strength from above to be faithful in these days of trouble and rebuke and blasphemy, to set our faces like flint, alike against the censure and applause of the multitude, and to dare to be singular for righteousness' sake, and to fight single-handed the battles of the faith. They were men of prayer. It is true they labored much, visited much, studied much, but they also prayed much. In this they abounded. They were much alone with God, replenishing their own souls out of the living fountain, that out of them might flow to their people rivers of living water. In our day, there is doubtless among many a grievous mistake upon this point. Some who are really seeking to feed the flock and to save souls are led to exhaust their energies upon external duties and labors, overlooking the absolute necessity of enriching, ripening, filling, elevating their own souls by prayer and fasting. On this account, there is much time wasted and labor thrown away. A single word coming fresh from the lips that have been kindled into heavenly warmth by near fellowship with God will avail more than 1,000 others. And one more for tonight. There were men whose doctrines were of the most decided kind, both as respects the law and gospel. There is a breadth and power about their preaching, a glow and energy about their words and thoughts that make us feel that they were men of might. Their trumpet gave no feeble or uncertain sound, either to saint or sinner, either to the church or the world. Their preaching seems to have been of the most masculine and fearless kind, falling on the audience with tremendous power. It was not vehement, and you give a little definition, or vehement meaning marked by extreme intensity of emotions or convictions. It was not fierce. It was not noisy. It was far too solemn to be such. It was massive, weighty, cutting, piercing, sharper than a two-edged sword, Hebrews 4:12. Hence so many fell wounded under them, such as is the case of the celebrated Thomas Shepherd of Cambridge, regarding whom it is said, he scarce ever preached a sermon, but some or other of his congregation were struck with great distress and cried out in agony, "What shall I do to be saved?" They were men of solemn deportment and deep spirituality of soul. Their lives and their lips accorded with each other. Their daily walk furnished the best attestation and illustration of the truth they preached. They were always ministers of Christ, wherever they were to be found or seen. No frivolity, no worldly companionships neutralized their public preaching or marred the work they were seeking to accomplish. The world could not point to them as being but slightly dissimilar from itself, or as men who, though faithful in the pulpit, forgot throughout the week their character, their office, their errand. Luther once remarked regarding a beloved and much admired friend, "He lives what we preach." So it was with these much honored men whose names are in the book of life. We quote the following account of Gilbert Tennant's life and doctrine from the pen of Thomas Prince. It will illustrate some remarks under the former head. From the terrible and deep convictions he had passed through in his own soul, he seemed to have such a lively view of the divine majesty, the spirituality, purity, extensiveness, and strictness of his law, with his glorious holiness and displeasure at sin, his justice, truth, and power in punishing the damned, that the very terrors of God seemed to rise in his mind afresh when he displayed and brandished them in the eyes of unreconciled sinners. Though some could not bear the representation and avoided his preaching, yet the arrows of conviction by his ministry seemed so deeply to pierce the hearts of others, even some of the most stubborn sinners, as to make them fall down at the feet of Christ and yield a lowly submission to Him. Such were the convictions wrought in many hundreds in this town by Mr. Tennant's searching ministry. And such was the case of those many scores of several other congregations as well as mine who came to me and others for direction under them. Indeed, by all their converse, I found it was not so much the terror as the searching nature of his ministry that was the principal means of their conviction. I found not merely, nor so much his laying open the terrors of the law and wrath of God, or damnation of hell, for this they could pretty well bear, as long as they hoped these belonged not to them, or they could easily avoid them, as his laying open their many vain and secret shifts, or schemes or methods, and refuges, counterfeit resemblances of grace, delusive and damning hopes, their utter impotence and impending danger of destruction, whereby they found all their hopes and refuges of lies to fail them, and themselves exposed to eternal ruin, unable to help themselves in a lost condition. The searching preaching was both the suitable and principal means of their conviction. And now was such a time as we never knew. More came to one minister in 1 week in deep concern about their souls than in the whole 24 years of his preceding ministry. He goes on, Mr. Bonar does. He says, as an illustration of how remarkably the work was of God and not of man, we quote without comment the following passages from, quote, a narrative of surprising conversions by Jonathan Edwards. It is observable how at this remarkable day a spirit of deep concern would seize upon persons. Some were in the house, some walking in the highway, some in the woods, and some in the field, some in conversation, and some in retirement, some children, some adults, some elderly persons, would sometimes of a sudden be brought under the strongest impressions from a sense of the great realities of the other world and eternal things. But such things, as far as I can learn, were usually, if not always, impressed upon men while they were in some way exercising their minds upon the Word of God or spiritual objects. For the most part, it has been under the public preaching of the Word that these lasting impressions have been fastened upon them. A great and earnest concern about the great things of religion and the eternal world became universal in all parts of the town, and among persons of all degrees and ages. The noise among the dry bones waxed louder and louder. Ezekiel 37:4. All other talk but about spiritual and eternal things was soon thrown by. The minds of the people were wonderfully taken off the world. It was treated among us as a thing of very little consequence. They seemed to follow their worldly business more as a part of their duty than from any disposition they had to it. The only thing in their view was to get to the kingdom of heaven, and everyone appeared to be pressing into it. The engagedness, or the earnest consideration of their hearts in this great concern could not be hid. It appeared in their very countenances. It was then a dreadful thing amongst us to lie out of Christ. It means to be outside of Christ, not to lie in a falsehood. In danger every day of dropping into hell. And what persons' minds were intent upon was to escape for their lives, or to fly from the wrath to come, as Luke 3:7. All would eagerly lay hold of opportunities for their souls, and were wont very often to meet together in private houses for religious purposes. And such meetings, when appointed, were greatly thronged. There was scarcely a single person in the town, young or old, left unconcerned about the great things of the eternal world. Those who were wont to be the vainest and loosest, those who had been most disposed to think and speak slightly of vital, that means living, and experimental religion were now generally subject to great awakenings. The work of conversion was carried on in a most astonishing manner and increased more and more. Souls did, as it were, come by flocks to Jesus Christ. From day to day, for many months together, might be seen evident instances of sinners brought out of darkness into marvelous light. Our public assemblies were then beautiful. The congregation was alive in God's service, everyone earnest, intent on the public worship. Every hearer eager to drink in the words of the minister as they came from his mouth. The assembly in general was, from time to time, in tears while the word was preached. Some weeping with sorrow and distress, others with joy and love, others with pity and concern for the souls of their neighbors. Those amongst us that had formerly been converted were greatly enlivened and renewed with fresh and extraordinary incomes of the Spirit of God, though some much more than others, according to the measure of the gift of Christ. Many who had before labored under difficulties about their own state had now their doubts removed by the more satisfying experience and more clear discoveries of God's love. When man proceeds to the accomplishment of some mighty enterprise, he puts forth prodigious efforts. That's great efforts, or large efforts. As if by the sound of his axes and hammers he would proclaim his own fancied might and bear down opposing obstacles. He cannot work without sweat, dust, and noise. When God would do a marvelous work, such as may amaze all heaven and earth, He commands silence all around, sends forth the still small voice, and then sets some feeble instrument to work, and straightway it is done. Man toils and pants, and after all effects but little. The Creator, in the silent majesty of power, noiseless yet resistless, achieves by a word of the infinite wonders of omnipotence. In order to loose the bands of the winter and bring in the verdure of the pleasant spring, He does not send forth His angels to hew in pieces the thickened ice, or to strip off from the mountainside the gathered snows, or to plant anew over the face of the bleak earth flowers fresh from His creating hand. No, He breathes from His lips a mild warmth into the frozen air, and forthwith, in stillness but in irresistible power, the work proceeds. The ice is shivered, the snows dissolve, the rivers resume their flow, the earth awakes as out of sleep, the hills and the valleys put on their freshening verdure. The fragrance of earth takes wing and fills the air, until a new world of beauty arises in silence amid the disillusion of the old. Such is God's method of working, both in the natural and the spiritual world. Silent, simple, majestic, resistless. Such was the Reformation. Such were the revivals in Scotland under our fathers of the covenant. Such was the Kirk o' Shotts, the memorable Pentecost, when the unstudied words of a timid, trembling youth carried salvation to 500 souls. Such was in Ayr in its Pentecostal days, when from the lonely church at midnight there went up to heaven the broken sighs of that man of prayer, John Welsh. It's in 1560s to 1622. And such was Northampton in the later times, when Jonathan Edwards watched and prayed for its citizens. When from the closet of that holy man there went forth the living power that wrought such wonders there. Is the Lord's hand shortened that He cannot save, or His ear heavy that it cannot hear? Isaiah 59:1.